Rafael Torres walked into that Aria courthouse with an $80,000 watch on his wrist and absolute confidence in his heart. The tech mogul expected his broken housewife to beg for scraps while he finalized his upgrade to a stunning 28-year-old mistress. But when those courtroom doors opened, the woman who entered wasn't the defeated wife he remembered. She moved like a predator who had been planning this moment for months, and she wasn't asking for alimony or the house. She was demanding his entire company. You see, Estelle Gray had a secret that would destroy everything Rafael thought he knew about his own success. Hidden in her university files was proof that the $400 million empire he claimed to have built was actually constructed on something he had stolen 20 years ago. What happened next would shock his business partner into betrayal, turn his own daughter against him, and reveal that even his beautiful mistress had been playing a game he never understood. This is the story of how one man's arrogance led to the most spectacular courtroom destruction in business history, and how the quiet woman he underestimated became the architect of his complete downfall. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Aria Central Courthouse in Aria. As Rafael Torres adjusted his $80,000 PC Felipe watch with the casual confidence of a man who had never truly lost anything that mattered. At 48 years old, he commanded a technology empire worth $400 million, and today he was here to complete what he considered nothing more than a simple business transaction, divorcing his wife of 20 years to make room for his upgrade. "You need to relax, Rafael," whispered Isabella Monet, her perfectly manicured fingers squeezing his arm with practiced precision. At 28, she embodied everything he believed he deserved, after 2 decades of what he privately called settling for less. Her platinum blonde hair caught the courthouse lighting like spun gold, and her designer dress, a red Valentino that cost more than most people made in a month, hugged curves that made every man in the marble hallway turn to stare. She was his trophy, his proof that success meant never having to compromise again. Rafael chuckled, the sound echoing off the courthouse walls with the resonance of a man accustomed to being heard. Estelle will probably walk in here looking like death warmed over. Cry a little bit, maybe beg for forgiveness, and then gratefully accept whatever scraps I decide to throw her way. 20 years of marriage to a woman who gave up her career to raise our kids and organize charity events. She has absolutely no idea how the real world works anymore. The dismissive cruelty in his voice would have shocked the young man who had once promised to love Estelle in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. But that idealistic college student had been buried under years of success, ego, and the intoxicating belief that his achievements gave him the right to rewrite the rules of basic human decency. His attorney, Dominic Vance, approached with a briefcase that cost more than most people's cars, his Armani suit perfectly tailored to project the kind of authority that made opposing counsel nervous before proceedings even began. Vance was Aria's most feared divorce attorney, known for systematically dismantling opposing parties until they felt grateful for whatever his clients offered. His track record was legendary. He had never lost a high-profile divorce case. "Everything is perfectly positioned, Rafael," Vance said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man who had orchestrated dozens of similar destructions. "We have thoroughly documented her complete financial dependence on you, her total lack of recent work experience, and most importantly, her documented emotional instability since you filed for divorce." The emotional instability was their nuclear weapon. Estelle had suffered what the medical records termed a severe anxiety and depression episode when she discovered Rafael's affair with Isabella. She had been hospitalized for 3 days, unable to eat or sleep, her world shattered by the betrayal of the man she had trusted completely for 20 years. Vance planned to use her mental health crisis as evidence that she was an unfit parent and unsuitable for any significant financial settlement. "How much are we realistically talking about here?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying that slight southern drawl that Raphael found irresistibly sexy. She had grown up in a small town, the daughter of a mechanic and a waitress, and her hunger for the finer things in life matched his own ambition perfectly. Extremely generous by any reasonable standard, Vance replied with satisfaction. The house in Onyx Ridge Estates, $3 million in cash, and modest monthly spousal support that decreases over 5 years. She should be sending us thank you cards. Raphael nodded approvingly, remembering the woman he had married back when they were both idealistic university students. Estelle had been brilliant once, a computer science major at Aria Tech University, with a mind that could solve complex problems he couldn't even begin to understand. She had been passionate about technology, working late into the night on coding projects with an intensity that had initially attracted him. But that was before children arrived, before years of school pickups and parent-teacher conferences and endless household management had dulled whatever intellectual edge she once possessed. She had become predictable, safe, boring, a wife who reminded him more of his suburban mother than the dynamic partner who should have been exciting a successful man. She questioned his business decisions, worried constantly about ethics and employee treatment, and had the annoying habit of bringing up his promises from their early marriage when he was focused on building an empire. The contrast with Isabella could not have been more dramatic and satisfying. Where Estelle had let herself go after 2 pregnancies, gaining weight and dressing like a suburban soccer mom, Isabella maintained her body like a precision instrument, spending hours each day in the gym and spa. Where Estelle questioned his choices and made him feel guilty about his success, Isabella celebrated every achievement and encouraged his most ambitious plans. She understood that powerful men needed powerful women beside them, not anchors dragging them down toward mediocrity. "There she comes," Vance muttered, nodding toward the courthouse entrance with the tone of a hunter spotting his prey. Raphael turned, prepared to see the broken shell of the woman he had left 8 months ago. The Estelle he remembered from their final confrontation had been hollow-eyed and devastated, wearing one of those shapeless cardigans she seemed to live in, moving through their 20-room house like a ghost haunting the ruins of her former life. He expected tears, perhaps some dramatic pleading that would make him look reasonable and generous by comparison to the packed gallery of reporters who had come to witness the dissolution of one of Aria's most prominent power couples. Instead, a complete stranger walked through those imposing courthouse doors. This woman moved with unmistakable purpose and authority. Her previously mousy brown hair now cut in a sharp, professional bob that framed features Raphael barely recognized. Gone entirely was the soft uncertainty he remembered, the apologetic way she had moved through the world during their final months together. In its place was something harder, more focused, almost predatory in its intensity. She wore a navy blue power suit that spoke of boardroom authority rather than desperate pleading, and her grey eyes swept the crowded hallway with the calculating gaze of someone who owned every square inch of space she occupied. "Jesus Christ," Isabella breathed, and for the first time since Raphael had known her, uncertainty crept into her usually confident voice. The woman, who had once been his wife, approached their small group with measured steps that seemed to count down to some inevitable confrontation. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the trembling vulnerability Raphael had been counting on to make this process simple and humiliating for her. "Hello, Raphael," Estelle said crisply, extending a hand to Vance with the professional courtesy of one business leader greeting another. "Mr. Vance, I presume. I have been very much looking forward to our discussion today." Raphael found his voice only after a moment of stunned silence that felt like an eternity. "Estelle, you look completely different." "I have had 8 months to remember who I used to be," she replied evenly, her grey eyes meeting his without the slightest flinch or hint of the pain he had expected to see there. "Before I forgot myself entirely in service to someone else's dreams and ego." Something cold and unfamiliar settled in Raphael's stomach as he watched his ex-wife walk toward the courtroom with the confident stride of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. This was absolutely not the script he had written for today's proceedings, and for the first time in years, Rafael Torres felt the uncomfortable sensation of being completely unprepared for what was about to happen to him. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Elena Ramirez commanded immediate respect with her no-nonsense demeanor and well-earned reputation for cutting through legal theatrics like a hot knife through butter. At 55, she had presided over some of Aria's most contentious and high-profile divorce cases, and something about the Torres divorce had already caught her sharp attention during the preliminary hearings that had taken place over the past month. Raphael settled into his chair with Isabella positioned beside him, like a perfectly arranged accessory, while his expensive legal team arranged their papers with military precision and obvious confidence. Across the narrow aisle that might as well have been an ocean, Estelle sat with her attorney, Clara Dubois, a woman known more for meticulous preparation and brilliant legal strategy than flashy courtroom theatrics or media manipulation. The gallery behind them was packed with reporters, legal observers, and curious members of Aria's tech community who had heard whispers about what might unfold today. The Torres divorce had all the elements that made for compelling courthouse drama. Massive wealth, a beautiful younger woman, a scorned wife, and the kind of corporate intrigue that could reshape Oria's business landscape. The petitioner seeks dissolution of marriage with standard community property division, Vance began, his voice carrying the smooth authority of aged whiskey and countless courtroom victories. Mr. Torres has built Apex Dynamics from absolutely nothing into one of Oria's most successful and internationally recognized technology companies. He respectfully requests reasonable settlement terms that accurately reflect his wife's limited contribution to their joint financial success. Judge Ramirez nodded thoughtfully, making careful notes on the legal pad before her. And what exactly does Mrs. Gray seek in response to these proposed terms? Clara Dubois rose slowly from her chair, her movements deliberate and measured like those of a chess master who had been planning her strategy for months. "Your Honor, my client is not requesting standard community property division. We are asking this court to carefully examine the true foundation upon which Apex Dynamics was built and to determine whether Mr. Torres has any legitimate legal right to claim ownership of the intellectual property that forms the core value of his company." The courtroom fell completely silent, except for the mechanical hum of fluorescent lights and the soft scratching of reporters' pens on paper. Raphael felt Vance stiffen noticeably beside him, and Isabella's perfectly manicured hand found his forearm again, her grip significantly tighter than it had been moments before. "Please elaborate for the court, Counselor," Judge Ramirez commanded, with the tone of someone accustomed to getting immediate and complete answers. "Your Honor, we intend to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the revolutionary algorithm that powers Apex Dynamics and generates virtually all of its revenue was not created by Rafael Torres in his garage startup, as company mythology and press releases have claimed for the past 15 years. We will demonstrate conclusively that this technology was created entirely by Estelle Gray, then Estelle Valois, as part of her senior thesis project at the Aria Tech University Computer Science Department in 2004. Vance shot to his feet like a man who had been struck by lightning. "Objection, Your Honor. This is nothing more than harassment based on ancient history and selective memory. Mrs. Gray was a supportive spouse during the early years of the company's development. Nothing more than that." "Your Honor," Dubois continued with perfect calm, completely ignoring Vance's theatrical objection. "We have extensive documentation proving that the Nexus Core algorithm, which currently generates over 90% of Apex's annual revenue of $250 million, was entirely conceived, programmed, and tested by my client. Mr. Torres commercialized her work without any form of compensation, recognition, or legal transfer of intellectual property rights. This constitutes one of the most egregious cases of technology theft in Aria's business history." Raphael's carefully ordered world tilted slightly on its axis. Nexus Core. He had not heard that specific name spoken aloud in at least 15 years, had almost managed to forget that it had ever been called anything other than the Apex Core platform. That was what Estelle had called her senior project during their final semester at ATU, the elegant and revolutionary piece of code that could optimize data processing workflows in ways that seemed almost magical to everyone who witnessed it in action. He remembered with uncomfortable clarity watching her work on that project, staying up all night in their shared apartment near campus, her eyes bright with the pure joy of creation and discovery. She would sit at her ancient desktop computer for 12 or 14 hours straight, completely absorbed in solving problems that left him feeling intellectually inadequate, occasionally emerging from her coding trance to explain some breakthrough in terms he could barely comprehend. He also remembered with a growing sense of dread how seamlessly that revolutionary code had become the foundation of Apex just 2 years later, and how naturally he had begun presenting it as his own innovation when talking to potential investors, journalists, and industry conferences. It had not felt like theft at the time, he told himself defensively. They were married, planning a future together. What was hers was naturally his, and what was his was hers. That was how marriage worked, wasn't it? "This is completely ridiculous," Raphael whispered urgently to Vance. But his attorney's usually confident expression had been replaced by something that looked disturbingly like professional concern mixed with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Torres," Judge Ramirez addressed him directly, her sharp eyes studying his face with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "Are you claiming under oath that you independently developed the technology that powers your company and generates its primary revenue stream?" The moment stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Raphael had told this story so many times over the years in countless interviews and conference presentations and company promotional materials that it had become his unquestioned truth. In his official biography, in the company's founding mythology, in the narrative that had made him Oria's most celebrated tech entrepreneur, he was the brilliant visionary who had revolutionized data processing through pure genius and relentless innovation. Admitting anything different would not just be embarrassing or awkward. It would potentially destroy his legal claim to the company that bore his name, unravel the reputation he had spent 15 years building, and possibly expose him to criminal charges for fraud and intellectual property theft. "Yes, Your Honor," Raphael heard himself saying, the words emerging with more confidence than he actually felt. "The core technology was entirely my creation and my intellectual property." Estelle turned to look at him for the first time since entering the courtroom, and her expression was not angry or hurt or devastated as he had expected. Instead, it was something far worse and more unsettling. Disappointment mixed with what looked almost like pity, as if she were watching a stranger make a series of predictably self-destructive choices. "In that case, Your Honor," Dubois announced, while opening her expensive leather briefcase with practiced precision, "we would like to present compelling evidence to the contrary, beginning with Mrs. Gray's original thesis documentation, time-stamped and verified by the Aria Tech University Computer Science Department, Faculty and Administration." As Dubois began systematically distributing copies of documents that Raphael had not seen in nearly 20 years, he felt the first genuine spike of fear pierce through his carefully maintained confidence. These were not the desperate, flailing attempts of a broken housewife trying to extract sympathy from the court. This was the methodical, thorough preparation of someone who had spent months, possibly years, building an airtight legal case designed to destroy him completely. Isabella leaned close to his ear, her breath warm against his neck, but her voice carrying a sharp edge he had never heard before. "Raphael, what exactly is she talking about? You never mentioned anything like this to me, ever." For the first time in their entire relationship, Raphael Torres did not have a confident, reassuring answer for the beautiful woman beside him. He could only sit in growing dread and watch as his ex-wife methodically began dismantling the foundation of everything he had built his identity and reputation upon, brick by carefully documented brick. The evidence presentation began with the surgical precision of a master prosecutor building an airtight murder case. Each piece of documentation building inexorably toward a conclusion that made Raphael's chest tighten with anxiety and growing panic with each passing minute. Clara Dubois moved through Estelle's meticulously organized materials like a conductor leading a symphony, every gesture calculated for maximum impact on both the judge and the packed gallery of observers. "Exhibit A, Your Honor," Dubois announced, while holding up a bound document that looked official and academically impressive. Mrs. Gray's senior thesis proposal, submitted to Dr. Annalise Beaumont of the Aria Tech University Computer Science Department on September 15, 2003. Please note the detailed description of what my client called the Nexus Core algorithm, including preliminary code samples and theoretical frameworks that would later become the foundation of a $400 million technology company. Judge Ramirez studied the documents carefully, while Raphael's mind raced through memories he had tried to suppress for years. He remembered that thesis proposal with uncomfortable clarity now. He had not only helped Estelle proofread the technical writing, he had marveled at her ability to see elegant solutions to problems that completely eluded him. She had always been the superior programmer of the two of them, but he had possessed the business vision and natural salesmanship that could convince investors to fund their dreams. "Exhibit B, Your Honor," Dubois continued, while producing a worn external hard drive that looked like an artifact from the early 2000s. This device contains the complete and original source code for Mrs. Gray's thesis project, created and last modified during the spring semester of 2004. Our forensic computer analysis, conducted by 3 independent expert witnesses, confirms both its authenticity and its creation date beyond any reasonable doubt. Vance finally found his voice and his footing, rising from his chair with the practiced authority of a man who had salvaged hopeless cases before. "Your Honor, this proves absolutely nothing more than that Mrs. Gray worked on similar concepts during her college years. Thousands of computer science students explore ideas that later find commercial application through the hard work and business acumen of others. This is hardly unusual or legally significant." "Similar concepts?" Dubois' voice carried a note of genuine incredulity that resonated throughout the courtroom. "Your Honor, we have conducted a comprehensive line-by-line comparison between Mrs. Gray's original thesis code and the current Apex core platform that powers Mr. Torres's company. The correlation is 94.7% identical in all core functions, with the remaining differences consisting entirely of cosmetic updates and user interface improvements. Raphael felt perspiration beading on his forehead, despite the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. Beside him, Isabella shifted uncomfortably in her designer chair, her earlier confidence beginning to evaporate as the true implications of what they were hearing became impossible to ignore or dismiss. Furthermore, Your Honor, Dubois produced another thick set of documents from her seemingly endless briefcase. We have email correspondence between Mr. and Mrs. Torres dating from 2004 through 2007 during the crucial early years of Apex development. In these communications, Mr. Torres repeatedly and explicitly refers to your brilliant algorithm, your revolutionary Nexus core system, and discusses detailed plans to build our company around your technological breakthrough. The emails. Raphael remembered those emails with a sinking feeling of dread. Messages sent during the early days of their marriage, when he was still genuinely impressed by Estelle's technical genius and grateful for her contributions to their shared dreams. Before success and ego had convinced him that he deserved all the credit for their joint accomplishments, before he had begun rewriting their history to make himself the sole hero of their story. Vance attempted immediate damage control, his voice carrying a slight hint of desperation that experienced courtroom observers would have recognized as the sound of a previously confident attorney realizing his case was collapsing. Your Honor, these communications clearly show a collaborative marriage where supportive spouses naturally shared their work and ideas. Nothing in these emails suggests any form of theft or improper appropriation. Exhibit D, Your Honor, Dubois interrupted smoothly, while presenting a final set of official-looking documents. A signed and notarized statement from Dr. Annalise Beaumont, now Professor Emeritus at Area Tech University, confirming that Estelle Valois' Nexus core algorithm represented revolutionary work that she strongly encouraged be patented immediately upon completion. Dr. Beaumont states, and I quote directly, "In 30 years of teaching computer science at the university level, I have rarely encountered such innovative and groundbreaking thinking. Miss Valois' senior thesis work was doctoral dissertation-level research that could have launched an entire academic career and fundamentally changed how the technology industry approaches data processing challenges." Judge Ramirez looked up from the documents with an expression that had grown increasingly serious and focused. "Mr. Torres, given this extensive evidence that has been presented to the court, do you still maintain your previous testimony that you independently developed the Nexus core technology?" This was the crucial moment of truth that would determine the trajectory of the rest of Raphael's life. He could feel the weight of 20 years of carefully constructed lies pressing down on him like a physical burden. He glanced desperately at Estelle, hoping to see some trace of softness or mercy, some indication that she might accept a face-saving compromise that would allow him to maintain some dignity while acknowledging her contributions. Instead, he found those penetrating gray eyes watching him with the infinite patience of someone who already knew exactly what choice he would make, someone who had predicted his response and prepared accordingly. "I want to be completely honest with this court," Raphael began carefully, his legal training from years of depositions guiding his words. Estelle was certainly supportive during those early developmental days, but the actual commercialization, the business applications, the market strategy. "Mr. Torres," Judge Ramirez's voice cut through his equivocation like a blade. "I am asking you a direct question that requires a direct answer. Did you or did you not personally create the core algorithm that powers your company and generates its primary revenue? The courtroom was absolutely silent. Raphael could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel Isabella's increasingly tense presence beside him, could sense his entire world balanced precariously on the edge of his next words. 20 years of lies and self-deception had led inevitably to this single moment of forced honesty. I refined and developed the commercial applications of the technology, he said finally, the words feeling like they were being pulled from his throat against his will. But the original concept, the foundational algorithm, that was Estelle's work. It was the first completely honest statement he had made in the courtroom, and it felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff into free fall. Judge Ramirez made careful and detailed notes, while Vance frantically scribbled on his legal pad, probably calculating how much damage control would be possible after such a devastating admission. Isabella's perfectly manicured hand slipped away from Raphael's arm entirely, and when he glanced at her, her expression had shifted dramatically from supportive girlfriend to concerned businesswoman, rapidly calculating her own options and exit strategies. Mrs. Gray, Judge Ramirez addressed Estelle directly, while the courtroom remained dead silent. What specific remedy or compensation are you seeking from this court for this intellectual property? Estelle stood with the fluid grace and natural authority of someone who had been preparing for this exact moment for months of careful planning. Your Honor, I am not seeking compensation for past work or recognition for previous contributions. I am requesting the complete return of my stolen property. The word stolen hit Raphael like a physical blow to his solar plexus. I am asking this court to recognize that Apex Dynamics was built entirely on technology that was never legally transferred, licensed, or sold to Mr. Torres under any form of contract or agreement. I am requesting majority ownership of the company I actually created, with full authority to determine its future direction and leadership. The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs and excited whispers. Vance looked like he had been struck by lightning. Isabella actually gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of shock. And Rafael Torres, millionaire technology entrepreneur and Aria business icon, felt his carefully constructed world begin to crumble around him in real time. He had walked into this courthouse that morning, expecting to finalize a simple divorce and rid himself of an inconvenient wife. Instead, he was watching that same woman systematically dismantle his entire life with the methodical precision of a demolitions expert bringing down a skyscraper. During the lunch recess, the courthouse hallway buzzed with frantic activity as attorneys huddled in intense strategy sessions, and Raphael tried desperately to process the magnitude of what was happening to his previously secure and carefully ordered world. Vance had pulled him into a corner conference room, his usual courtroom composure completely replaced by barely controlled panic and professional alarm. Raphael, why in God's name did you not tell me about any of this? Vance demanded, his voice low but urgent with the kind of anger that comes from being blindsided by his own client. I look like a complete amateur in there. If she has a legitimate legal claim to the core intellectual property of your company, we are not just talking about a messy divorce settlement. We could be looking at criminal fraud charges, complete corporate restructuring, and the total destruction of your professional reputation. It was 20 years ago, Raphael interrupted, running his hands through his hair with increasing desperation. We were married, planning a future together. What was hers was ours. What was mine was hers. I never thought she would be vindictive enough to use our shared history against me like this. She was always so supportive, so understanding. You never thought she would be smart enough to use it against you, Isabella finished coldly. She stood with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, studying Raphael with an expression he had never seen before, as if she were seeing him clearly for the very first time. "This woman is not the broken-down housewife you described to me, Raphael. She has been planning this systematic destruction for months, maybe even years." Raphael looked desperately between his lawyer and his girlfriend, suddenly feeling very alone, despite being surrounded by people who were supposed to be on his side. "We can fight this. There has to be some statute of limitations, some marital property law that protects spouses from this kind of retroactive attack. Not if she can prove intentional fraud and ongoing deception," Vance said grimly, loosening his expensive tie as if it were choking him. "If the entire foundation of your company is based on her work that was never legally transferred through proper contracts or agreements, we are looking at potential criminal prosecution, not just civil liability. The district attorney could decide to make an example of you." A new voice interrupted their increasingly desperate huddle, and Raphael turned to see a familiar figure approaching through the crowded hallway. "Having second thoughts about your brilliant legal strategy?" Raphael felt a surge of relief as he recognized Marco Rossi walking towards them, his business partner and oldest friend from their college days together. Marco had been the third crucial member of their original garage startup team, the marketing and operations genius who had helped transform Estelle's revolutionary algorithm into a commercially viable product. He was supposed to be there as Raphael's primary character witness, someone who could testify to Raphael's essential contributions to the company's success. "Marco, thank God you are here," Raphael said with genuine gratitude. "Please tell them this whole thing is completely insane. You were there from the very beginning. You know exactly how we built this company together as equal partners." Marco's expression was strange and unsettling, almost melancholy, as if he were attending a funeral for someone he had once cared about deeply. "Actually, Raphael, that is exactly why I am here today. I need to tell you something that I should have said years ago. Something I have been carrying around like a guilty secret." Something cold and predatory settled in Raphael's stomach at the tone of Marco's voice. "What exactly are you talking about?" "I have been watching you systematically take credit for Estelle's work for 15 years, Marco said quietly, his words carrying the weight of long-suppressed truth. "I have watched you rewrite our company's history, convince yourself and everyone else that you were the technical genius behind Nexus Core, and gradually erase Estelle's contributions from every story you tell about our success. I stayed quiet because we were friends, because the company was profitable, because I told myself it did not really matter anymore, since she seemed happy with her family life." Vance stepped forward aggressively, his lawyer instincts sharp and protective. "Mr. Rossi, I strongly advise you not to make any statements without proper legal counsel present. Anything you say could be used against you in future proceedings." Marco ignored the attorney completely, his eyes fixed on Raphael with an expression of profound disappointment. "But it does matter, and it always mattered. Estelle created something truly revolutionary, and you have spent 20 years pretending it was your innovation. I cannot watch you try to destroy her reputation to protect a lie that we all know is a lie." Raphael felt the solid ground beneath his feet beginning to shift and crack. "Marco, you cannot be serious about this. We are business partners. We have been friends since college. We built this company together from nothing." "No, Raphael. You and I marketed and commercialized what Estelle built. There is a very important difference between those two things, and I am tired of pretending there is not." Marco pulled out his smartphone and showed the screen to Vance with a grim expression. "I have been recording our private conversations for the past month. Ever since I heard about these divorce proceedings and realized what you were planning to do to Estelle, I have hours of audio of you admitting that her work was the foundation of everything we built, that you have been taking credit for her genius." The blood drained from Raphael's face as he heard his own voice playing softly from Marco's phone. Estelle was always the real brain behind the technology. She could see solutions that were completely invisible to me. I just knew how to sell her ideas to people who had money to invest. Isabella stepped back from Raphael, as if he had suddenly become contagious with some terrible disease. "You recorded him? Why would you do something like that to your business partner?" Marco looked at her with something approaching pity mixed with disgust. "Because Estelle asked me to help her. She reached out 3 months ago and said she was tired of watching her life's work credited to someone else while she was being discarded like yesterday's trash. She asked for my help in setting the record straight, and I realized I owed her that much at least." Raphael stared at his oldest friend, the man who had been best man at his wedding to Estelle, who had been chosen godfather to Sophia and Matteo, who had been his closest confidant through 2 decades of business success. "You have been working with Estelle against me. You have been spying on me for my ex-wife." "I have been working for the truth," Marco corrected firmly. "Something you stopped caring about a very long time ago, Raphael. Something you traded away for ego and public recognition." Vance grabbed Raphael's arm with urgency. "We need to regroup immediately and completely reassess our strategy. If your business partner is actively collaborating with the opposing party and has recordings of damaging admissions—" "There is more that you need to know," Marco interrupted, with the tone of someone delivering a final devastating blow. "Estelle did not just create the original algorithm 15 years ago. She has been secretly consulting on technological improvements for the past 5 years. Every time you came to her with problems your paid engineers could not solve. Every major upgrade to the Nexus core system, every breakthrough that kept Apex ahead of our competitors, every innovation that doubled our company valuation last year. All of that came directly from recommendations and solutions that Estelle developed, while you were telling everyone she was just a housewife who could not understand basic business principles." Raphael's knees nearly buckled as the full implications hit him. The successful product launches that had made him Aria's most celebrated entrepreneur, the technological innovations that had attracted major investment and partnership deals, the breakthrough algorithm improvements that had established Apex as the industry leader. All of it had come from suggestions that Estelle had made during their increasingly rare conversations about his work challenges. She has been secretly helping you succeed while you were publicly humiliating her and privately cheating on her, Marco continued relentlessly. While you were telling investors and journalists that she was just a suburban housewife who could not possibly understand your sophisticated business, she was solving the technical problems that your team of highly paid engineers could not figure out. Isabella was backing away from Raphael now, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor with increasing urgency. "I need to get some air," she said, but her voice carried a sharp edge that Raphael had never heard before, the sound of someone rapidly reassessing their investment in a failing proposition. "Isabella, please wait," Raphael called after her desperately, but she was already walking quickly toward the bank of elevators. David watched her retreat with a knowing expression that suggested he understood something Raphael did not. "You might want to have a very serious conversation with your girlfriend about her real motivations and loyalties, Raphael. Estelle is not the only person in your life who has been keeping important secrets from you." Before Raphael could ask what he meant by that ominous comment, Marco turned and walked back toward the courtroom, leaving Raphael and Vance alone in the hallway. Raphael felt like he was drowning, frantically grasping for something solid to hold on to, as everything familiar and reliable slipped away from his control. "We are in extremely serious trouble," Vance said grimly. "If your business partner testifies against you in court, if he has recordings of you admitting to taking credit for your wife's work, if the judge believes you have been committing ongoing fraud—" Raphael slumped against the cold marble wall, the expensive stone chilling him through his $1,000 suit. For the first time in 20 years of business success, he had absolutely no idea how to win. When court resumed after the lunch break, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically and unmistakably. Word of Marco Rossi's defection from Raphael's camp had spread through the courthouse's informal gossip network like wildfire, and the gallery was now packed with local reporters who sensed a major story unfolding. Legal observers eager to witness a spectacular courtroom destruction, and members of Aria's tight-knit technology community who were fascinated by the real-time collapse of one of their most prominent success stories. Raphael sat rigidly in his chair, acutely and uncomfortably aware that Isabella had not returned from her lunch break. Her empty chair beside him felt like a physical manifestation of his growing isolation, and her absence was being noted by every observer in the packed courtroom. "Your Honor," Clara Dubois began with the confident tone of an attorney who knew she held all the winning cards. "We call Marco Rossi to the witness stand." Raphael watched with a growing sense of doom as his oldest friend walked steadily toward the witness box, each step feeling like another nail being driven into the coffin of their 20-year friendship. Marco's face was resolute and determined as he was sworn in by the bailiff. And when his eyes briefly met Raphael's across the courtroom, there was genuine sadness there, mixed with something that looked like relief. "Mr. Rossi," Dubois began after Marco had been properly sworn. "How long have you known Raphael Torres?" 22 years, Marco replied clearly, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the silent courtroom. "We met during our sophomore year at Aria Tech University and have been business partners for 18 years. Were you present during the founding and early development of Apex Dynamics?" "I was intimately involved from the very beginning. Raphael, Estelle, and I worked together in their garage to transform Estelle's Nexus Core algorithm from an academic research project into a commercially viable product that could attract investment and generate revenue." Dubois moved closer to the witness stand with the predatory grace of a prosecutor, closing in on a key confession. "In your direct personal experience, who was the primary creator of the technology that became Apex Dynamics' core product and primary source of revenue?" Vance shot to his feet with an objection, but Judge Ramirez overruled him immediately. "The question is perfectly legitimate and directly relevant to the case. Estelle Gray created the Nexus Core algorithm entirely on her own," Marco said, his voice carrying the weight of long-suppressed truth finally being released into the light. "The revolutionary code, the innovative architecture, the breakthrough approach to data processing, all of that came directly from her brilliant mind. Raphael and I helped with business planning, investor relations, and marketing strategy. But the technology that made everything else possible was purely and completely Estelle's creation." Raphael closed his eyes and felt each word like a physical assault on everything he had built his identity around. "Mr. Rossi," Dubois continued methodically, "did Mr. Torres ever acknowledge Mrs. Gray's fundamental contribution to the company publicly?" "In the very beginning, yes, he did give her appropriate credit. But as the company grew larger, and Raphael became the public face of Apex through media interviews and conference presentations, Estelle's essential role was gradually and systematically erased from the official narrative. By the time we went public with our initial stock offering, the company's official story was that Raphael had single-handedly created the technology in his garage through pure genius and determination. Did you ever personally hear Mr. Torres acknowledge privately that the core technology was not his own creation? Marco paused for a moment, glancing at Raphael with what looked like genuine regret for what he was about to do to their friendship. Many times over the years, he would often say things like, "Thank God for Estelle's brilliant mind," or, "I could never have figured out that algorithm without her technical genius." But these private acknowledgements became less frequent as time passed and his public reputation grew. Dubois produced her smartphone with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, I have digital recordings of recent conversations between Mr. Rossi and Mr. Torres from the past month. With the court's permission, I would like to play selected excerpts for the record." Raphael's voice suddenly filled the courtroom through the sound system, clear and unmistakably his own. "The funny thing is, Marco, everyone thinks I am some kind of technical genius who revolutionized data processing. The truth is, I would not know elegant code if it jumped up and bit me on the arse. Estelle was always the real brains behind our entire operation. I just knew how to sell her revolutionary ideas to people with money." Another devastating clip followed immediately. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Estelle had pursued her own career in technology instead of sacrificing everything to support mine. She probably would have ended up running Google or Microsoft or something equally impressive. And finally, most damaging of all, she gave me everything she had, her brilliant work, her professional credit, her entire career, and I repaid her loyalty by trading her in for a much younger model. I am not particularly proud of what I did, but that is just business, right? You take whatever advantages you can get, and you move forward without looking back." The courtroom was dead silent, except for the soft, mechanical whir of the air conditioning system and the barely audible scratching of reporters frantically taking notes. Raphael felt completely stripped, naked and exposed, his private thoughts and casual cruelties laid bare for everyone to examine and judge. Judge Ramirez leaned forward with obvious interest. "Mr. Rossi, are these recordings authentic and unaltered?" "Yes, Your Honor. They are completely authentic. I made them with Mr. Torres's full knowledge that our business conversations were being recorded for potential documentation purposes. He signed a consent form as part of our updated partnership agreement." It was absolutely true, and Raphael remembered with sinking dread signing something that Marco had presented as standard legal protection for their business discussions. He had never imagined those recordings would ever be used as weapons against him in a courtroom. Vance attempted a desperate cross-examination, trying to paint Marco as a disgruntled business partner or someone with his own financial motivations. But Marco was completely unshakable in his testimony. Yes, he had been working closely with Estelle to document the truth about the company's origins. Yes, he believed she deserved full recognition and appropriate compensation for her revolutionary contributions. No, he did not believe Raphael had intentionally committed fraud in the very beginning of their partnership. But yes, he absolutely believed that the continued denial of Estelle's essential role had become fraudulent and deeply unethical over time. When Marco finally stepped down from the witness stand, he paused beside Raphael's table and leaned down to speak quietly. "I am genuinely sorry it came to this, Raphael, but someone had to tell the truth, and it should have been you." As his former best friend and business partner walked away, Raphael realized with devastating clarity that he was now completely alone. No supportive business partner, no loyal girlfriend. Facing an ex-wife who had spent months methodically preparing for this moment, while he had arrogantly assumed she was simply grieving their failed marriage and would eventually accept whatever scraps he chose to offer her. "Your Honor," Dubois announced, "we call our final witness, Sophia Torres." Raphael's head snapped up in complete shock and disbelief. His 16-year-old daughter walked into the courtroom wearing a simple black dress that made her look older than her years, her dark hair pulled back in a serious ponytail. She looked absolutely terrified, but also determined as she made her way to the witness stand, her chin raised with a defiant courage that reminded everyone present exactly whose daughter she was. "Sophia!" "No," Raphael whispered desperately, but she did not look at him as she was sworn in. Judge Ramirez addressed the teenager with obvious gentleness and care. "Miss Torres, you understand that you are not legally required to testify for or against either of your parents in these proceedings." "I understand that completely, Your Honor," Sophia replied, her young voice steady and clear despite her obvious nervousness. "But I want to tell the truth about what I have personally witnessed in my family over the years." Raphael felt his last remaining hope crumble as his own daughter prepared to testify against him. The brilliant legal strategy he thought he had crafted was about to be demolished by the person whose opinion mattered more to him than anyone else in the world. And there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. Sophia Torres sat in the witness chair with a composure and natural dignity that reminded everyone in the courtroom exactly whose daughter she was and which parent had been her primary role model. At 16, she had inherited her mother's sharp, analytical mind and her father's natural presence. But what struck Raphael most profoundly was the deep disappointment in her eyes when she finally looked directly at him. "Sophia," Clara Dubois began with obvious gentleness and care for the teenager's emotional state. "I know this must be extremely difficult and painful for you. Please tell the court about your parents' working relationship during your childhood." "My parents always worked as a real team," Sophia said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. "Dad would come home from the office completely frustrated about some technical problem that his engineers could not solve, and Mum would sit with him at our kitchen table and draw diagrams and flowcharts on napkins while she was helping me with my homework or feeding my little brother Matteo." Raphael remembered those kitchen table problem-solving sessions with uncomfortable clarity. Estelle's patient explanations and elegant solutions making the most complex technical challenges seem simple and manageable. He had completely forgotten how natural and automatic it had been to bring his most difficult work problems to her, how reliably she had provided innovative solutions that he could present to his team the following day. "Did your mother work on Apex Dynamics business on a regular basis?" Dubois continued. "All the time, throughout my entire childhood. She had a complete home office setup where she would test new code and write detailed technical reports for Dad's company. He would present her ideas and solutions to his development team the next day, usually in video conference calls that she would sometimes join from home, though usually she preferred to work behind the scenes." Vance started to object, but Judge Ramirez silenced him with a sharp look that suggested she was very interested in hearing what this young woman had to say. "Sophia, did you ever hear your parents discuss your mother's contributions to the company?" Sophia nodded seriously. "Mum always said she was happy to help Dad's business succeed, and that she did not need public recognition as long as the family was doing well. But sometimes I would hear them arguing late at night about credit and acknowledgement. Mum would get really upset when Dad gave interviews to magazines or spoke at conferences where he called himself the sole founder and inventor, and he would tell her that effective marketing required simple, clean stories that people could easily understand and remember." Raphael winced visibly as his own words came back to haunt him through his daughter's testimony. He remembered those arguments with Estelle, how he had dismissed her concerns as petty ego or unreasonable jealousy. It had never occurred to him that his children were listening carefully to those conversations and forming their own judgments about his character and treatment of their mother. What changes did you observe in your household over the past few years? Dad started working much later hours and traveling constantly for business. When he was home, he would often be angry and critical, especially toward Mom. He told her repeatedly that she had gotten lazy and boring, that she did not understand how competitive and demanding the modern business world had become. Sophia's voice remained steady and clear, but her hands were visibly clenched in her lap. He would make her feel stupid and worthless for not having her own career. But then he would also get angry whenever she talked about maybe going back to work or starting her own consulting business. The courtroom remained absolutely silent as this teenager calmly described the systematic emotional abuse that had characterized her parents' marriage during its final years. Sophia, when did you first learn about your father's romantic relationship with Isabella Monet? I suspected something was wrong for several months before I knew for sure. Dad was acting completely different, secretive, distracted, always checking his phone and going into other rooms to take calls. Then one night, I came home early from studying at the library and saw them together in our kitchen. Sophia's composure finally showed the first small crack. Isabella was wearing one of Mum's aprons and cooking dinner like she already lived there and belonged in our house. Raphael remembered that night with painful clarity. Sophia had walked in on what was supposed to be a private meeting where he and Isabella were discussing her transition from company employee to his personal life. The look of shock and betrayal on his daughter's face had haunted him, but he had pushed the memory aside and convinced himself that teenagers were naturally dramatic about adult relationships. What happened to your mother after your parents separated? She had a complete emotional breakdown and had to be hospitalized for severe depression and an anxiety. Dad told people she was just being dramatic and manipulative, but Matteo and I saw what his betrayal really did to her. She lost over 20 lay-bees because she could not eat. She could not sleep for weeks. She could not concentrate on anything. Sophia looked directly at her father with an expression of profound disappointment. She felt completely worthless as a human being because the person she had spent 20 years supporting and building up was now telling the entire world that she had never contributed anything valuable to his success. Dubois approached the witness stand carefully. Sophia, has your mother discussed her current plans regarding Apex with you? She never wanted to hurt Dad's company or put our family's financial security at risk. For months, she tried to find some kind of solution that would give her appropriate recognition for her work without destroying what she and Dad had built together over all those years. What changed her mind about that approach? Sophia glanced at her mother sitting in the gallery, then returned her attention to Dubois. She realized that staying silent and letting the lies continue was actually helping Dad hurt other people. The company culture at Apex became really toxic because Dad surrounded himself with people who would flatter his ego and agree with everything he said instead of challenging his decisions or offering better ideas. A lot of good employees were leaving the company, and technological innovation was getting stagnant because nobody wanted to suggest improvements that might make Dad look less brilliant. Raphael felt a chill of recognition. Several key employees had indeed left Apex in recent months, citing concerns about company direction and leadership style in their exit interviews. Mum also discovered that Dad had been planning to write her completely out of the company's history. He commissioned an official biography about Apex's success story that was going to be published next year, and it never mentioned her contributions at all. When she saw the preliminary manuscript, she realized he intended to erase her existence from their story entirely. The biography project. Raphael had indeed commissioned a high-profile business writer to create a book about Apex's rise to success, positioning himself as the visionary founder who had revolutionized an entire industry. He had never once considered how Estelle would feel reading a version of their shared history that rendered her completely invisible. "Your Honor," Sophia said, turning to address Judge Ramirez directly, with remarkable poise for someone her age. "My mother created something truly revolutionary, and then spent 20 years watching someone else take complete credit for her work. She supported our entire family and Dad's career, while her own dreams and ambitions were completely forgotten. She deserves to have her brilliant work recognized and acknowledged." Dubois indicated she had no further questions. Vance's cross-examination was necessarily brief and completely ineffective. Aggressively attacking a 16-year-old girl's testimony about her parents' marriage and her own childhood experiences was a no-win situation that would only make him look cruel and desperate. As Sophia stepped down from the witness stand, she stopped beside Raphael's table and leaned down to speak quietly. "I love you, Dad, and I always will. But what you did to Mum was wrong, and it hurt our entire family. I really hope that someday you will understand that and find a way to make things right." Raphael watched his daughter walk back to sit beside her mother in the gallery, and for the first time in months, he saw them clearly as they really were. Estelle had her arm around Sophia protectively, providing comfort and strength and unconditional support. They looked like a complete and healthy family unit, and Raphael realized with devastating clarity that he was now the outsider looking in at the life he had thrown away. He had traded his real family for an illusion of masculine success and sexual conquest, and now both the family and the illusion were slipping irretrievably away from his grasp. The afternoon recess felt like a funeral procession as Raphael stepped into the courthouse hallway, his world having been systematically dismantled by the three people he had trusted most in his life. Vance was frantically making phone calls to other attorneys and legal experts, seeking some desperate strategy or procedural loophole that might salvage their catastrophic position, but his increasingly frantic tone and body language suggested he was finding no viable solutions to their crisis. Raphael's phone buzzed constantly with urgent messages from reporters seeking statements, board members demanding explanations, and Apex employees who had heard rumors about the proceedings and were concerned about their job security. The company's stock price was already dropping precipitously as word leaked about the intellectual property dispute, and his carefully constructed business empire was literally cracking apart in real time as the market responded to news of the courtroom revelations. "Raphael." Isabella's familiar voice came from behind him, and he turned with a surge of desperate relief. He spun around to see her walking toward him through the crowded hallway, and for a brief moment he felt hopeful that at least one person in his life remained loyal and supportive. She looked as perfectly composed and beautiful as always, every strand of blonde hair precisely in place, her makeup flawless despite the stress and drama of the day. Her appearance was so normal and reassuring that he almost convinced himself everything would somehow work out. "Isabella, thank God you are here. I know this entire situation looks completely insane right now, but we will find a way to get through this together once this legal mess settles down and we can regroup." "We need to have a serious conversation," she interrupted flatly, her tone completely businesslike and devoid of any warmth or affection. Privately. Right now. Something in her voice made his stomach clench with apprehension, but he followed her down the hallway to an empty conference room. Isabella closed the door behind them with deliberate precision and turned to face him with an expression he had never seen before, cold, calculating, almost predatory in its complete lack of emotion. "Raphael, I need you to understand something very clearly," she began in a tone that sounded like a business executive delivering bad news to shareholders. "I am not going down with your sinking ship." "What are you talking about? This is just a temporary legal challenge. We have resources. We have options. We can fight this." "With what exactly?" Isabella's voice cut through his desperate optimism like a knife. "Your company was built on stolen technology that you have been lying about for 20 years. Your business partner has completely turned against you and has recordings of you admitting to fraud. Your own teenage daughter just testified about your character and treatment of her mother. Your stock price is in complete freefall as we speak." She paused, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen under a microscope. "You are completely finished, Raphael." Raphael stared at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the person he had believed was deeply in love with him. "Isabella, you love me. We have been making plans for our future together." She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass, sharp and cutting, and completely devoid of warmth. "Love, Raphael? I am 28 years old. I look like a fashion model, and I have an MBA from a top business school. Do you honestly think I fell in love with your sparkling personality and brilliant conversation skills?" The words hit him like physical blows to his chest and stomach. "I do not understand what you are saying. I was attracted to your success, your power, your wealth, and your status in Aria's business community. Take all of those things away, and what is left? A middle-aged man who betrayed his family and built his entire reputation on lies and stolen credit." Isabella moved to the conference room window to check her reflection, smoothing her hair with practiced vanity. "I am not the kind of woman who stands by her man through adversity and scandal. I am the kind who finds a better man with better prospects." Raphael felt dizzy and nauseous. "Isabella, please, we can work through this together. I can rebuild my career. I can start over." "No, Raphael, you really cannot." She turned back to him with an expression of cruel finality. "Because I haven't been completely honest with you either about my motivations and activities." Something in her tone made his blood run cold with fear. "What do you mean by that?" Isabella smiled, and it was not the warm, seductive expression he remembered from their intimate moments together. It was cold and calculating and completely without mercy. "I have been systematically documenting everything, Raphael. Every private conversation where you admitted to taking credit for Estelle's work, every plan you made to minimize her divorce settlement, every cruel and dismissive comment you made about your wife and children. Why would you do something like that to me?" "Insurance and leverage," she said simply, as if she were discussing the weather. "I always knew this relationship might not work out permanently. I needed to protect my own interests and establish my own value as a potential witness or source of information. So I have been very carefully recording our most private conversations for months." Raphael's knees nearly gave out as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. "You have been spying on me this entire time. I have been securing my own future, just like you taught me to do in business. Always maintain leverage. Always have multiple exit strategies. Always be prepared to cut your losses when an investment goes bad." Isabella pulled out her smartphone and showed him a recording application that had clearly been used extensively. "I have hours and hours of audio recordings of you, Raphael. You admitting to intellectual property theft, you planning to cheat your wife out of a fair settlement, you saying horrible and degrading things about your own children." The betrayal was so complete and devastating that Raphael literally could not process the scope of what she was telling him. "What do you want from me?" "I want to make a deal with Estelle's legal team. My testimony and my recordings in exchange for complete immunity from any potential criminal charges related to your business practices and fraud." Isabella's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing mundane business arrangements. "I need to position myself publicly as a victim of your manipulation and deception, not as an accomplice or co-conspirator." Raphael grabbed her arm desperately. "You cannot do this to me. We were partners in this relationship." She pulled away from his touch with obvious disgust. "We were never partners, Raphael. You were a stepping stone to bigger and better opportunities, and now you have become a liability that could damage my reputation and future prospects." Isabella headed for the conference room door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Oh, and Raphael, you might want to very carefully check your company's financial records and confidential files. I have had complete access to your home office computer system for months. Estelle's legal team might have significantly more evidence against you than you realize." She left him alone in the conference room, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Raphael slumped into a chair and put his head in his hands, trying desperately to comprehend the magnitude of his complete destruction. His wife had systematically built an airtight legal case against him. His business partner had secretly betrayed him and provided damaging evidence. His daughter had testified to his character failures and emotional abuse. And now his mistress was preparing to sell him out to save herself, while revealing that she had been stealing confidential business information that could expose him to criminal prosecution. Every single relationship in his adult life had been poisoned by his arrogance, greed, and casual cruelty. He had assumed that everyone around him was weak, grateful, and easily manageable. Instead, they had all been watching, documenting, and preparing for this moment when his house of cards would finally collapse under the weight of his own lies and betrayals. Vance knocked on the conference room door urgently. "Raphael, we need to discuss plea bargain options immediately. If the FBI decides to get involved in these intellectual property theft allegations, if there are potential criminal charges." Raphael looked up at his attorney and saw yet another person whose loyalty was purely transactional and would evaporate the moment his ability to pay legal fees disappeared. How long would it be before Vance abandoned him, too? He had walked into this courthouse that morning, believing he was in complete control of his life and destiny. Now he realized he had been the only person in the entire situation who did not understand what was really happening around him. The king was dead. Long live the queen. When court reconvened for the final session of the day, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely contained excitement. News of the morning's devastating revelations had spread far beyond the courthouse walls, and the gallery was now packed to capacity with reporters from major news outlets, legal observers from across the state, and curious members of the public who had been drawn by social media coverage of a tech mogul's spectacular real-time destruction. Raphael sat at his defendant's table, feeling utterly and completely alone in the world. Vance had managed to locate another experienced attorney willing to assist with damage control, but their whispered conversations carried the desperate, futile tone of people trying to negotiate surrender terms rather than achieve any kind of victory or favorable outcome. Across the narrow aisle that might as well have been an ocean, Estelle sat with quiet confidence beside Clara Dubois and a small team of legal advisors. She looked serene and peaceful, almost radiant, as if an enormous weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders after years of carrying it alone. The contrast with Raphael's obvious distress and isolation was stark and noted by every single observer in the packed courtroom. Judge Ramirez called the court to order, with unusual formality that suggested she understood the historical significance of the case she was about to decide. Before we proceed with closing arguments, I understand there are additional materials that need to be submitted to the court for consideration. Clara Dubois stood with the confident bearing of an attorney who knew she held every winning card. Yes, Your Honor. We have audio recordings provided by Miss Isabella Monet, documenting numerous explicit admissions by Mr. Torres regarding his systematic appropriation of Mrs. Gray's intellectual property, as well as his deliberate plans to minimize her recognition and compensation. Raphael watched in numb horror as his most private and intimate conversations were prepared for public consumption. His voice would soon fill the courtroom, casual and careless as he spoke to Isabella about the woman he had promised to love and honor. The supreme irony is that Estelle could have been a tech industry CEO herself if she had not wasted her considerable intelligence and talent on raising our family and supporting my career. But that situation worked out perfectly for me. I got access to her revolutionary innovations and her complete, unquestioning dedication. Another devastating clip followed. Estelle thinks marriage is supposed to be about true partnership and mutual support. But successful business is really about winning at any cost. I took whatever I needed to succeed, and she was too trusting and naive to stop me. And most damaging of all, I have spent so many years convincing everyone, including myself sometimes, that I am the technical genius behind Apex's success. But late at night, when I'm honest with myself, I know the absolute truth. Everything valuable and innovative came directly from her brilliant mind. Each recording hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Raphael could see the obvious disgust on Judge Ramirez's face, the satisfaction and vindication on Estelle's legal team, and the frantic note-taking by reporters who sensed they were witnessing a career-making story unfold in real time. Furthermore, Your Honor, Dubois continued relentlessly, Miss Monet has provided extensive documentation showing that Mr. Torres has been systematically and deliberately excluding Mrs. Gray from all company historical records, including commissioning an official biography that completely erases her fundamental contributions to Apex's founding and development. The biography manuscript was formally entered as evidence, and its glowing portrayal of Raphael as a solo genius made his systematic erasure of Estelle's role even more damning and inexcusable in the eyes of the court. Vance rose for his closing argument, but his heart clearly was not in the effort. What could he possibly say at this point? That his client was fundamentally an honest man who had simply forgotten to credit his wife for creating the technology that made him wealthy and famous. That 20 years of systematic lies and deliberate deception were just an innocent oversight. Your Honor, Vance said weakly, his voice lacking any of its usual courtroom authority. Mr. Torres built a highly successful company that currently employs over 800 people and contributes significantly to ARIA's economic development and technological reputation. Whatever the disputed origins of the core technology, his leadership abilities and business expertise created substantial value for employees, investors, and the broader community. It was a pathetically weak argument, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Clara Dubois' closing argument was devastating in its elegant simplicity and moral clarity. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about theft, not theft of money or physical property, but theft of recognition, credit, professional reputation, and life opportunities. Mr. Torres systematically stole his wife's revolutionary work and built his entire public reputation on it, while simultaneously erasing her contributions from every aspect of their shared story. Dubois gestured towards Estelle with obvious respect and admiration. Mrs. Gray did not seek recognition or credit for 20 years because she believed deeply in partnership, in family, and in supporting her husband's dreams and ambitions. She was repaid for that selfless loyalty with betrayal, public humiliation, abandonment, and a calculated attempt to write her completely out of the history she helped create. But this case is also about justice delayed, not justice denied. Mrs. Gray's brilliant work created apex dynamics from nothing. Her continued secret contributions sustained its technological leadership and market success. Her intellect and innovation deserve recognition and acknowledgement, not systematic erasure and denial. Dubois paused dramatically, letting her words resonate throughout the silent courtroom. Your Honor, we ask not just for fair division of marital assets, but for complete restoration of stolen credit and recognition. Mrs. Gray should be acknowledged as the true founder and primary technological innovator behind Apex Dynamics. Judge Ramirez retired to her chambers to consider her decision, while the courtroom buzzed with nervous energy and excited speculation. Raphael sat in complete silence, watching Estelle accept congratulations and support from the growing crowd of people who had appeared throughout the day. Former university colleagues, technology industry professionals, and other women in tech who saw her case as a powerful symbol of something much larger than a single divorce proceeding. 45 minutes felt like an eternity before Judge Ramirez returned to the bench, her expression grave and absolutely determined. This court has rarely encountered a case that so clearly demonstrates the systematic appropriation of intellectual property within the context of a marriage, she began, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. The evidence presented to this court has been both overwhelming in scope and deeply disturbing in its implications. Raphael's chest tightened with dread as he prepared to hear his fate. Mr. Torres has explicitly admitted, both in formal deposition testimony and in multiple recorded private conversations, that the foundational technology of Apex Dynamics was created entirely by Mrs. Gray. His continued claims of authorship and innovation constitute deliberate fraud that has been perpetuated for nearly 2 decades. The word fraud echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, and Raphael felt his remaining hopes crumble. Furthermore, the extensive evidence demonstrates a clear pattern of emotional manipulation and financial abuse designed to systematically diminish Mrs. Gray's sense of personal worth and her legitimate claims to recognition for her groundbreaking work. Judge Ramirez looked directly at Raphael with an expression of obvious disapproval and moral judgment. This court finds that Apex Dynamics was built entirely on revolutionary technology, developed solely by Estelle Gray, appropriated without her informed consent or any form of fair compensation, and commercialized through systematic deception and historical revisionism. Raphael felt the last foundations of his world completely disintegrate. Therefore, this court awards Mrs. Gray 70% ownership of Apex Dynamics with full authority to determine company leadership, strategic direction, and operational management. Mr. Torres will retain 20% ownership as partial compensation for his marketing and business development contributions during the company's growth phase. The remaining 10% will be held in trust for their minor children until they reach the age of 25. 70%. Estelle would now control his company, his life's work, his entire professional identity and legacy. Additionally, Mr. Torres will be required to publicly acknowledge Mrs. Gray's role as the true creator of the Nexus core technology and primary innovator behind Apex's revolutionary success through press releases, media interviews, and corrections to all existing company historical materials. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, and Rafael Torres's 20-year reign as Aria's most celebrated tech entrepreneur officially ended in complete disgrace. As reporters rushed to get exclusive statements, and Estelle was surrounded by supporters and well-wishers, Rafael sat completely alone at his defendant's table, staring in shock at the wreckage of everything he had built on lies and betrayal. He had gained the world by stealing someone else's work and lost his soul in the process. Now he had lost the world as well, and there was no path back to redemption. 6 months after the courthouse devastation that destroyed his empire and restored Estelle's stolen legacy, Rafael Torres sat in a modest coffee shop in South Aria, surrounded by the kind of ordinary people he had once looked down upon with casual arrogance. The $60 artisanal lattes he used to order without thinking had been replaced by simple black coffee from a ceramic mug, a small but constant reminder of his dramatically reduced circumstances and shattered social status. The Aria Business Journal lay folded beside his cup, its front page dominated by a glowing profile of Apex Dynamics' remarkable transformation under new CEO Estelle Gray. The company's stock price had not only recovered from the initial shock and volatility of the ownership transfer, but had reached record highs as Estelle implemented technological innovations that had been stalled for years under Rafael's increasingly paranoid and ego-driven leadership. Estelle Gray has transformed Apex from a company that was coasting on past achievements into a dynamic innovator that is once again pushing the boundaries of what is possible, read a quote from a prominent industry analyst. Her visionary technical leadership, combined with ethical business practices and genuine employee empowerment, has created a workplace culture that attracts the very best talent from across the entire technology sector. Rafael closed the newspaper with hands that trembled slightly from a combination of medication side effects and emotional stress. The woman he had systematically dismissed as a boring suburban housewife was now being celebrated as one of Aria's most visionary business leaders and technology innovators. Tech industry magazines featured her on their covers with headlines about the stolen genius finally getting her due. Universities across the country invited her to deliver keynote speeches about innovation, perseverance, and overcoming systemic discrimination. The professional recognition and respect he had craved and pursued for decades was now flowing to her in overwhelming abundance. His phone buzzed with a text message from his current attorney, his third since the divorce proceedings, as legal fees had forced him to continually downgrade to cheaper representation. The criminal investigation into Apex's business practices under his leadership had been quietly dropped due to insufficient evidence of intentional wrongdoing. But the civil lawsuits from former employees who claimed wrongful termination and discrimination were mounting steadily. His 20% ownership stake in the company, which had initially seemed like a devastating punishment, was now his only reliable source of income as legal fees and settlement costs consumed his remaining liquid assets. The coffee shop door chimed softly, and Rafael looked up to see Sophia walking toward his table with the measured gait of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than seeking connection. His 17-year-old daughter met him here every few weeks for these carefully scheduled visits that felt more like charity work than genuine family time. "Hi, Dad," Sophia said, as she settled into the worn chair across from him. At 17, she had grown into a remarkably poised and intelligent young woman who looked increasingly like her mother with each passing month. She was headed to Stanford University in the fall on a full academic scholarship, her future bright with limitless possibilities and opportunities. "How are you holding up?" she asked, and Raphael could hear the careful politeness in her voice that had completely replaced their once natural and easy affection. "I am managing to get by," he replied, though they both understood it was barely true. His clinical depression had deepened significantly over the months as the full scope of his losses became impossible to ignore. Not just the money and professional status and public recognition, but the meaningful relationships that had once given his life purpose and joy. "Mum wanted me to tell you about the new scholarship program she is launching," Sophia said, with obvious pride in her mother's achievements. "The Estelle Gray Foundation for Women in Technology. It is going to fund complete college educations for girls from low-income families who want to pursue computer science and engineering careers." Raphael nodded without surprise, recognizing the generous impulse as exactly the kind of thing the Estelle he had originally married would have wanted to do before he had convinced her that her dreams and ambitions mattered less than supporting his career and ego. She has also been asked to testify before Congress next month about intellectual property rights and gender discrimination in the technology industry, Sophia continued. The story of what happened to her has apparently become a powerful symbol for thousands of women who have had their work overlooked, minimized, or stolen by male colleagues. Raphael felt a familiar stab of emotion that fell somewhere between genuine regret and bitter envy. Estelle was rapidly becoming exactly the kind of respected public figure and policy influencer he had always desperately wanted to be. Someone whose opinions shaped industry standards and government regulations. Someone whose personal story inspired meaningful social change. "How is your mother doing personally?" Raphael asked quietly, dreading but needing to hear the answer. Sophia studied her father's face carefully before responding. "She is genuinely happy, Dad. Really, truly happy in a way I had never seen before. She wakes up every morning excited about her work and the positive impact she is making. She is also in a serious relationship now with Dr. Julian Alves, a computer science professor at ATU who knew her back in graduate school. He treats her like she is the most brilliant person he has ever met, instead of trying to diminish her to make himself feel more important." The information about Estelle's new relationship twisted in Raphael's chest like a knife being slowly turned. She had not just moved on and recovered from their marriage. She had found someone who genuinely appreciated and celebrated her intelligence and achievements. Someone who did not need to steal her accomplishments to feel worthy of being her partner. "Dad," Sophia said, with the careful tone of someone who had been rehearsing a difficult conversation. "I know you are hurting and struggling right now, but you have to understand that what you did to Mum was not just unfair or inconsiderate. It was systematically devastating to her sense of self-worth and professional identity. You made her believe she was worthless while building your entire public success on her revolutionary work." Raphael wanted desperately to argue, to defend his choices and actions, but the months of forced solitude and therapy had gradually stripped away most of his protective delusions and self-justifications. "I know what I did was wrong," he whispered. "Do you really, though?" Sophia leaned forward with an intensity that reminded him powerfully of her mother at that age. "Because I still hear you talking about what happened to you, not what you did to her. You lost your company because you systematically stole credit for her brilliant work for 20 years. You lost your family because you chose a younger woman over the people who genuinely loved and supported you. You lost your reputation because you built it entirely on lies and betrayal. Each word hit Raphael like a physical blow, because they were undeniably, painfully true. "I made terrible mistakes," Raphael said weakly, grasping for some way to minimize his culpability. "Dad, they were not mistakes. They were deliberate choices that you made every single day for 20 years. Every morning you chose to take credit for Mum's revolutionary work. You chose to make her feel small and worthless, so you could feel important and successful. You chose to betray our entire family for a woman who was obviously using you for your money and status." Sophia pulled out her smartphone and showed him a social media post that made his stomach clench with recognition. It was Isabella Monet, now working as a marketing consultant in Dallas, posting about her role in helping expose corporate fraud and systematic discrimination against women in technology. She had successfully repositioned herself publicly as a principled whistleblower rather than an opportunistic accomplice who had betrayed him to save her own reputation. "Even she is doing significantly better than you are right now," Sophia said, with obvious sadness for her father's situation. Because she understood how to cut her losses intelligently and reinvent herself when circumstances changed. "But you are still sitting here feeling sorry for yourself, instead of figuring out how to become a better person who deserves respect." Raphael stared at his daughter, seeing his ex-wife's brilliant analytical mind combined with a moral clarity and strength of character that highlighted his own ethical failures in sharp, unforgiving relief. "What would you have me do at this point?" "Start by actually taking full responsibility for what you did," Sophia replied firmly. "Not just admitting that you were wrong, but truly understanding why your choices were wrong and working actively to make genuine amends. Mum does not want or need your apology. At this point, she has moved far beyond needing your validation or recognition. But Matteo and I still need a father who is worthy of our respect and love." She gathered her purse and stood to leave, her movements carrying the confident grace of a young woman who knew her own worth and would never allow anyone to diminish it. "I will see you in a couple of weeks. Please think seriously about what I said." Raphael watched his daughter walk away, her shoulders straight with the kind of self-assurance he had tried to steal from her mother for 20 years. He was alone again in the coffee shop, surrounded by the consequences of his choices, finally beginning to understand the true cost of the life he had built on systematic lies and casual cruelty. 2 years had passed since the courthouse reckoning that completely destroyed Rafael Torres's empire and fully restored Estelle Gray's stolen legacy to its rightful place in technology history. The Aria tech community had long since moved past the initial scandal, embracing Estelle as one of its most respected and influential leaders, while Raphael gradually faded into relative obscurity and irrelevance. Apex Dynamics, now officially renamed Gray Innovations to honor its true founder and primary innovator, occupied a gleaming new corporate campus in South Aria that had become a model for ethical technology companies worldwide. The company culture Estelle had deliberately built from the ground up emphasized collaboration over competition, ethical leadership over profit maximization, and genuine recognition for all contributors, regardless of their gender, background, or seniority level. Employee satisfaction scores consistently ranked as the highest in the entire technology industry, and the company's breakthrough innovations in sustainable data processing had attracted global attention from environmental organizations and government agencies. Estelle stood in her spacious corner office, looking out at the Aria skyline as she prepared for her afternoon presentation to the City Council about expanding technology education programs in underserved communities throughout Central Texas. The Estelle Gray Foundation had already funded complete college scholarships for over 300 young women pursuing careers in computer science and engineering, and her advocacy work had led to significant policy changes around intellectual property rights and workplace discrimination at both state and federal levels. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her fiancé, Dr. Julian Alves, a computer science professor at Aria Tech University, who had known her during their graduate school days, but had reconnected with her only after her public vindication. He understood and celebrated her passion for technological innovation, not as a threat to his own professional ego, but as one of the qualities he most admired and respected about her as both a colleague and life partner. Incredibly proud of you, as always. Dinner at 8 to celebrate another day changing the world for the better. Estelle smiled warmly, remembering how foreign such unconditional supportive partnership had felt when they first began dating seriously. After 20 years of having her contributions systematically minimized and dismissed, being with someone who actively celebrated her professional successes and intellectual achievements had required significant emotional adjustment and healing. A soft knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Her executive assistant entered with an expression of genuine surprise mixed with curiosity. Estelle, there is someone here to see you who does not have an appointment. Rafael Torres. He says he has something that belongs to you, and that he needs to return it personally. Estelle felt the familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of her ex-husband's name, though the sharp pain of their complicated shared history had gradually dulled to a manageable ache over the months of therapy and personal growth. She had not seen Rafael since their final custody hearing 18 months ago, when they had worked out a practical arrangement that prioritized their children's emotional well-being above their own complicated feelings and unresolved conflicts. "Please send him in," she said, after a moment of careful consideration. Rafael entered her impressive office, looking significantly older than his 50 years. The confidence, swagger, and natural authority that had once defined his public persona were completely replaced by something that resembled genuine humility mixed with deep regret. He wore a simple blue button-down shirt instead of the expensive designer suit she remembered, and his hair had gone completely grey at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished, but also somehow diminished. "Hello, Estelle," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of its former commanding presence. "Thank you for agreeing to see me without advanced notice." "Raphael," she gestured toward the comfortable chairs arranged in front of her desk, deliberately choosing not to sit behind it in a position of authority or dominance. Whatever this unexpected conversation was going to be, she wanted it to happen between equals rather than as some kind of power dynamic. "What can I do for you?" Raphael reached into a worn canvas messenger bag and carefully pulled out a familiar leather portfolio that made Estelle's breath catch in her throat. It was her original senior thesis from their university days, complete with all her handwritten notes and calculations. She had not seen it in nearly 20 years and had assumed it was lost forever. "I found this in storage while I was cleaning out my apartment," he said, placing it gently on the coffee table between them with obvious reverence. "It belongs to you. It always belonged to you, and I should have returned it years ago." Estelle opened the portfolio carefully, seeing her younger self's passionate handwriting, filling page after page with revolutionary ideas and elegant solutions that had ultimately transformed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. The margins were filled with excited notes and complex calculations, the work of a brilliant young mind exploring uncharted intellectual territory with pure joy and determination. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" she asked, genuinely curious about his motivations. Raphael settled back in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, in a gesture of complete openness and vulnerability. Because I have spent the past 2 years in intensive therapy, working to understand how I became someone capable of systematically erasing the person I once loved most in the entire world. My therapist helped me finally see that I was not just taking credit for your work. I was attempting to steal your identity and achievements to compensate for my own deep insecurities and feelings of intellectual inadequacy. He looked directly at her for the first time since entering the office, and she was surprised to see genuine tears forming in his eyes. I was threatened by your brilliance, Estelle. I always had been, even back in college. You could see elegant solutions to problems that completely baffled me. And instead of celebrating that incredible gift, I felt diminished and threatened by it. So I started taking credit for your ideas as a way to feel worthy of being your intellectual equal and life partner. Estelle felt something fundamental shift inside her chest as she heard him articulate the emotional truth that had underlain all his destructive behavior. This was the first time Raphael had ever acknowledged the psychological reality beneath his actions, not just their practical consequences or legal implications. The credit-taking became a habit, then a deliberate strategy, then a complete delusion, Raphael continued with obvious difficulty. I convinced myself over the years that my business skills and marketing abilities were what made your ideas commercially valuable, that I somehow deserved equal credit for transforming your academic research into profitable products. But the absolute truth is that I was always just the salesman. You were the true visionary and innovator. Tears were now flowing freely down Raphael's face, and Estelle realized with shock that she had never once seen him cry during their entire 20-year marriage. Not during their wedding ceremony, not at their children's births, not even during their devastating divorce proceedings. I destroyed our family and threw away 20 years of genuine partnership to chase an ego boost from a woman who saw me as nothing more than a convenient meal ticket, he said, his voice breaking with genuine emotion. I traded away the most extraordinary person I had ever known to feel temporarily important to someone completely ordinary and manipulative. It was the most catastrophically stupid failure of judgment in human history. Estelle found herself unexpectedly moved by his raw honesty and obvious emotional pain, though she remained appropriately cautious and guarded. Raphael, I genuinely appreciate you acknowledging all of this so clearly, but why now? What do you want from me? Nothing at all, he said with simple sincerity that surprised her. I do not want your forgiveness because I understand that I do not deserve it and never will. I do not want any kind of reconciliation because that possibility ended when I made my choices and you have built a much better life without me in it. I simply wanted you to know that I finally understand the full magnitude of what I destroyed and that I am working every single day to become someone worthy of our children's continued respect and love. He reached into his messenger bag again and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it beside the thesis portfolio. This is a complete public statement detailing my appropriation and theft of your work, written entirely in my own words for release to any media outlets or industry publications you choose to use it with. I am also formally donating my remaining shares in Grey Innovations to your foundation's scholarship program. Estelle stared at the envelope in genuine surprise. Raphael, those shares are worth several $1 million at current market value. That represents your entire retirement security and financial future. I will figure out some other way to support myself, he said, with a self-deprecating smile that reminded her briefly of the young man she had once fallen in love with. Maybe I can become a more honest salesman for someone else's legitimate innovations and ideas. Those shares should go toward helping other women avoid what happened to you." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the weight of 25 years of shared history settling between them like a familiar presence. Estelle looked carefully at the man she had once loved with complete trust and devotion, seeing perhaps for the first time the person he might have become if fear, insecurity, and toxic masculinity had not poisoned his character and judgment. "How are Sophia and Matteo doing?" she asked finally, genuinely interested in his relationship with their children. Raphael's expression brightened noticeably for the first time during their conversation. "They are both absolutely incredible young people. Sophia is thriving at Stanford. She is studying computer science and artificial intelligence, following directly in her mother's brilliant footsteps. Matteo has been accepted to several top engineering programs and will probably end up at MIT or Caltech. They are both ethical, accomplished, intellectually curious people despite having me as their father." "They had you as their father, too," Estelle corrected gently but firmly. "You made terrible, destructive choices that hurt our entire family, Raphael. But you were not entirely a terrible father to them. They remember and value the good parts of their relationship with you as well." Raphael looked genuinely surprised by her unexpected kindness and generosity. "You do not have to say that to make me feel better about my failures. I am not saying it to make you feel better. I am saying it because it is objectively true, and because Sophia and Matteo need to know that their father is genuinely capable of growth and positive change." Estelle closed her thesis portfolio carefully. "What are your plans for the future?" "I am working as a business strategy consultant for small startup companies, helping them with marketing plans and investor relations. It is honest work that makes good use of my actual skills, and I am reasonably good at it when I am not trying to take credit for other people's technical innovations." Raphael stood to leave, moving toward the door with obvious reluctance. "I hope that someday our children will be genuinely proud to introduce me as their father, rather than embarrassed by my past behavior and choices." He paused at the office door and turned back to face her one final time. "Estelle, for whatever it is worth, after everything I put you through, seeing what you have built here, the leader you have become, the respect and recognition you have earned, it represents everything you deserved 20 years ago and should have had all along. I am genuinely happy that you finally have the professional success and public acknowledgement that was always rightfully yours." After Raphael left, Estelle sat alone in her office for a long time, processing the unexpected encounter and its emotional implications. The man who had systematically betrayed and abandoned her was clearly not the same person who had just walked into her office with genuine remorse and a desire to make whatever amends were possible. The change seemed authentic and deeply rooted, born from serious self-examination rather than strategic positioning or manipulation. She opened her laptop and began typing a careful email to Sophia and Matteo, letting them know about their father's visit and sharing her honest belief that he was working seriously to become someone worthy of their continued relationship and respect. Outside her office windows, Aria's skyline stretched toward the horizon, a city built on innovation, determination, and the kind of resilience that allows people and communities to reinvent themselves when circumstances demanded. Estelle Grey had not just reclaimed her stolen legacy and built something even greater from its foundation. She had demonstrated that redemption and positive change were possible for anyone willing to do the difficult work of honest self-examination and genuine accountability. But perhaps more importantly, she had shown that truth has a way of emerging no matter how deeply it is buried. that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that the quiet strength of those who build, rather than simply boast, will ultimately be recognized and celebrated by history. In the end, Estelle Grey had not just won her legal case or reclaimed her professional reputation. She had won something far more valuable and lasting: the restoration of her own voice and the absolute assurance that it would never again be silenced, minimized, or stolen by anyone. This incredible true story gets more shocking with every twist. If you're curious to see how far this man's world crumbles and what his ex-wife was really planning all along, you'll want to hear every detail. And if this story resonates with you, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's dive into Chapter 1, The Arrogant King.